I would hope we see more of these blended hybrid workplaces where people want to go to get their work done for the right reasons. That we have found some happy medium of what a productive work environment looks like, feels like for people to thrive in, not just survive. And I really, really hope that these 5 leadership practices begin to take hold as the new way to lead in the future that keeps people engaged in the work that they're doing, that helps people say, I love what I do. I love the company I work for. I love working for this boss.
Welcome to the Warriors at Work show. This is Jeannie Coomber, your guide and host. This is a show for men and women in the workplace who want to move from the predictable to the potent. This is your weekly dose of inspiration with an edge. I talk with CEOs and shamans, sports marketing executives and therapists. All of us are like-minded thinkers and doers who tell stories, share wisdom, and challenge each other to have the best life possible inside and outside the office. Welcome to your Warrior Conversation.
Hey everybody, it's Jeannie. Thank you so much for joining me here at Warriors at Work. Today I'm talking to author, talent strategist, extraordinary executive coach, professor, former head of HR, consultant, leadership development expert. I mean, the list goes on and on. She's also a dear friend, a confidant, someone I deeply admire and respect for all things around the future of work. Maryanne Spatola. And in this conversation, we are talking about her new book, The Office is Dead, Now What? Where she talks about aligning strategy with talent. This book is a culmination of many, many interviews. It's applicable to managers, executives, heads of HR, regardless of what you do and how you do it. The insights and strategies that she shares in this book are applicable right away. So get your pen and paper out. Here comes Maryanne Spatola. Maryanne Spatola is back here with me at Warriors at Work. You have been such an integral part of this whole Warriors at Work journey, and I am thrilled to provide you a platform to talk about your greatest piece of work, this new book, and what you're all about in the world. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for having me. And thank you for being such a big part of my journey as well. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be the person I am today had it not been for you.
Thank you. Well, isn't it nice to start a conversation with a little love fest?
It is.
We should take that out into the rest of our day. So let's set the table here. You wrote a book, The Office is Dead, Now What? Which I know you have in your hot little hands right now. The Office
And
is
it's
Dead,
here.
Now What? So why did you choose this book and why now?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think the impetus for me was even part of how I founded my business was being big part on the front lines of watching the future of work movement happen in our workplaces. And that's been going on for a very long time. I created a course way back in 2016 for NYU called The Future of HR. And it was all about aligning our function to the future of work and how do we best be prepared for that. So, you know the story. Fast forward 2020, here comes COVID and a pandemic, and it just accelerates not only the future of work, but puts HR right on the front lines
Mm.
of everything that's going on. And I'm watching it unfold and I'm watching all the changes. I'm listening to my clients and leaders talk about there's no playbook. We heard all these cliches, right?
Mm.
And struggling to figure out how do I lead through this because everything had changed, right? The whole world shifted out from under our feet. And over time, people started to get really good at it. We spent over 2 years in that COVID cocoon. People were enjoying the flexibility of working from home. Of course, it has its shadows as well. It's not all
Mm,
a utopia for people to work in a remote setting, but it was working. And then what happened was I was looking at one of my apps, Flipboard, just catching up on news and what's going on. And these reports of CEOs started to show up about mandating people back to the office. And my immediate reaction was no, 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 stop. This is not about just go back to the way we were. This is all about what did we learn
mm,
as a result of this, the largest global remote working experiment in history. And we shouldn't just revert back. We should take the lessons from it and build a better future going forward. And that was really the impetus for the book. So I went out and interviewed people, and it really started to come together. And I thought, I just have to do this.
This book, I think, has some incredible insights and perspectives that we all need to know more about and step into. And one of the things that you talked about in your book, which this notion of aligning strategy with talent, which sounds so obvious, right?
Yes.
But it's not often what happens.
No,
Strategy is often aligned with profitability and bottom line.
that's right.
Talent is almost like an afterthought, not for everybody, of course, but
Sure.
say more about what that is and how the heck you do that.
Well, that's actually been my wheelhouse as an HR exec, how I built my career, and clearly what I do in my business. And for me, it is all about the connection of talent and strategy. You can have the best strategy you want. If you don't have
Mm,
the talented workforce to deliver on it, you're going nowhere. It's, in a way related to that old quote from Peter Drucker about culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think was the original quote, and it turned
mhm.
into culture eats strategy for lunch. But that's what it really has always been about for me. I learned that early on in my career as I started to work more and more with the C suite, with the executives who had that disconnect that you're talking about. One organization I joined in their strategy was absolutely devoid of anything related to employees. I'm like, so who's doing the work? Like, you
Mm,
can't disconnect the two. And my firm belief is when you have that marriage and alignment is how businesses win. And I think what's happening now and what we see in the marketplace is that chasm still exists. We have executives who are demanding people just come back because, and you have a workforce that's saying, "Not so fast. I'm not
mhm.
willing to do that anymore."
What's so interesting to me, so you gave that example of it was devoid of anything relating to the people. So when you surfaced that, was there like well, that's a given that people are just going to execute and deliver on what we're doing, or what was the conversation that
Um,
followed?
in that organization, it was actually a good thing. The CEO that I was working for was not an HR aficionado, but he knew enough that if he didn't build a strategic HR function or have the talent in place, that he wouldn't get to his pretty aggressive growth goals
Mm,
for the organization. So I was fortunate in that regard. And what I walked into, and he was a pretty new CEO at the time, he had kind of adopted it from the previous executive team. And
mhm,
so it was an epiphany for everybody. It was more like the old VA commercial. Oh, how did we forget that? And it led to a lot of great additions to the strategy and shifts in how we delivered on that. That were very, very productive inside the organization and resulted in some foundational pieces that we built into the HR function for business success.
what about those CEOs that are still stuck on, I look at, when you're coming up with budgeting or profitability models, you're often focusing on historical events and then perhaps some current research that might help you strategize long term. But, what do you say to those that they say they want that level of relationship to the people. They want the transparency, but there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
How do you get them on board to this idea?
And that's actually a word I like to use, which is disconnect. One of the things I like to use as an approach is to help them see the perspective, is to highlight those things for them. But honestly, the best teacher is when they're in pain. So when they can't get the talent that they need and they're struggling to understand why, I often introduce ideas that I like to say make my idea their idea. So I do that through questions. I don't tell them what to do.
Right.
Nobody wants to be told what to do. And in fact, that's, the format of my book is a field guide through the lens of a coach to invite people to expand their perspectives and use a whole bunch of questions to get them thinking and decide on their own what they can do differently. And that's when you get positive change. You have to bring people to a place of recognition that something needs to be done differently, and help them to see they have that choice. They can do things differently, look at things differently to get a better outcome.
You brought that philosophy very much into this book and how you wrote it. And I was really struck by a lot of the conversations and all of the research and pieces that you added to this. And I've seen this too, is a lot of organizations are returning to, let's just call it pre-COVID
Yes.
expectation, ways of being. There's this momentum to go back. And I get some of it, right? So there's probably
Yeah,
some real estate costs involved.
absolutely.
There's the teaming idea involved. But my sense is it has a lot to do with control.
Yes.
So say more about your perspective and tell me what you think is going on here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it's a big power play at the moment. And you're right, there are clearly ripple effects from a fallout in less real estate
Mm.
space, right? Clients of mine, one company actually started a $10 million renovation right before the pandemic. Right?
Wow.
So they're on the hook. It's already a done deal. They're on the hook to do it. But what they've done is move it's a three-story building. They've moved their operations to the second and third floor, and now they're subletting the first floor space, right? So there's ways to work around it. But what I've noticed is in this lack of control, what we're starting to see is some of these ugly, bad, faulty leadership practices that got us in trouble the first time re-emerge. So they're clamping down on micromanagement. They're clamping down on, I have one client, they're taking attendance to see
They
who's actually
they
coming in the
check
building.
they check swipes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's working against them because even in a down economy, we still have a strong job market, which is, confounding to people. But the workforce still has a play and a pull in what they're willing to do.
Mhm.
Where we're seeing some successes are the organizations that are managing those polarities. As opposed to a either or, they're making it a yes and conversation and repurposing workspaces in a way that is inviting to people and they actually want to be there. And there's many reasons to gather, right? New employees who want to meet their teams, or a client kickoff and you want to have everybody together, or maybe it's a big town hall. There's still reasons to gather. And what I've noticed is organizations who can answer that question of why we gather, for what purpose, people are willing to come. There's still magic in the room when we gather as humans, right? We're never going to lose that. But just being told to come back because I
Yeah.
said so is really not working.
Yeah, I'm just like, yes. Yes, yes, and side of yes. I think it's just more like we have to be more creative. We
Yeah,
have to sit and think about what is it we're trying to achieve.
that's right. Yeah.
And I do believe that having some of the in-person interactions are really, really important, and I
Yeah,
think it's, you know, it's
they're
again, it's
valuable.
that teaming piece, but I think we could do it better, and I think the other notion, and you speak to very much about this in the book, is this idea is we can evolve this.
Right.
It's not, hard and fast, this is the way it's gonna be. I think it's the acknowledgement that the workplace just generally is growing and evolving. You have generational dynamics, which you also talk a lot about
Mhm.
in the book. But I think we just have to do this on a regular and consistent basis. It's almost like create a focus group whose sole
Yeah,
purpose it is to manage how well we're doing in this.
yeah,
How happy are our
exactly.
people? How well are we hitting our targets? How aligned are we to strategy? And just keeping that conversation in the forefront, I think is going to be really, really key.
Yeah, I think if I were to put a label on the biggest fear I think leaders are facing at the moment is giving agency to employees who have choice over where, how, and when they get the work done,
What is the concern?
because it goes back to all of the myths we started with around remote working, right? Management by walking around died during pandemic, right? It saw a quick and early death. So managers who lead by butts and seats mentality can't do that anymore. They have to focus on results. They have to look at what outcomes are we getting as opposed to how are they doing it? How many clicks are they making every day?
Mm.
It's just a very different way to lead, which is why I wanted to capture the lessons from the leaders who were doing it well to help others see there are better ways to do this.
So I want to build on that because one of the things that I really love at this book, in this book, is at the end of every chapter, you break down the key questions that you want to ask yourself as an executive, HR, and a manager. Say first why this approach, and then I want to get into some of the strategies that you talk about.
Yeah, really, the book, when I was thinking about a format that I wanted to use, I wanted to create something that was practical, something that would be a tool for people to use, and would invite them to think about ways they can operate differently in the future for a better outcome, right? How do we build healthier, stronger leaders and organizations? And I thought, like you, I'm a coach at heart, I'm a teacher at heart. And there is no one answer to these
Mm.
questions. And so the field guide format allowed me to do that. It allowed me to take the stories, combine the lessons, and then give people a chance to really think about what does that mean for me? And let them work their way through the book in different ways, right? They can go to a particular chapter that happens to call out to them. They might read it from cover to cover. But on the front end, it's a little of table setting, like how did we end up in this place in the first place? And on the back end, it's about, so now what are you going to do about it? Very much mimicking what a coaching session would be like, right?
Mm.
Having a call to action at the end. Now that you've read through this, what are you going to do about it?
I love that you said the coaching idea because this book reminded me of like a coach on call model or
Yeah.
a conscience on call model.
Oh, love that.
So, like, your conscience might say, whether you're an executive, whether you're HR, or whether you're a manager, you now have the pathway to how each of them might think and what questions would they ask. And I'll tell you, some of the questions you put in there are uncomfortable as hell.
Yeah, that's right.
And
That's the
and
idea.
and reflect, "Wow, didn't think of that.
Hmm.
Wow, what if I don't wanna do that? Oh my goodness, what would be the
Right.
impact?" Which leads me to my next question. So, I just love that you did it through that lens, and it didn't surprise me because I know you often will switch hats
Yeah.
between those 3 pieces. But you talk about the 5 practices of the future ready leaders,
Hmm.
and they are adaptable, empathy, progress signals, and decide. So, how do you get alignment on those
Mm.
5 within an organization? Because they feel really different.
They're different and yet they're synergistic, right? So
Mm.
if you think about adaptability wins, is all about learning to be flexible. And that's one of the big disconnects we're seeing. The employees really want it, And, executive and leaders are saying, we're not willing to let you do that anymore, right? Everybody back in the office. Sending signals is a different twist on communication because it takes us to what unsaid messages are being received in your workforce with things you say or don't say inside the organization. And looking at things like progress over perfection is all about learning to experiment, right? It's about one of my favorite quotes out of that chapter was during the pandemic when leaders were trying to figure everything out and they had no idea what they were going to do. Um, Experimenting felt like walking the tightrope with no net.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Right.
Terrifying.
So,
Especially in organizations that promote more, the unspoken, you said the unspoken, but more of a perfectionist
that's
mentality
right.
is we say we want you to take risk, but we don't create the conditions for you to truly take the
That's
risk.
right. Don't make a mistake
Mhm.
because and failure is not always welcomed. So, I think the 5 practices are actually very synergistic when you knit them together. And ultimately, what you want to do with the 5 practices is align it to how you achieve your strategy. What are
Mm.
the specific things, let's say in the deciding factor, right? A lot of what we learned during this pandemic was we had to make decisions in the moment with the best information we had and go. It might be wrong. I might have to change direction, but I have to take action. And that's something we want to hang on to going forward, right? Get it out of analysis paralysis. Our ability to make decisions with what we know and
Mm.
make a positive step forward, even if it's going to change, right? Unleashing the ways we used to get stuck in these old mental models of the past. And so when you put them all together, in a synergistic way and you align it to your organization's strategy, that then helps you create that roadmap that allows you to get there.
So does it start with just asking yourself well, first of all, I think there's an acknowledgement that you have to acknowledge that I'm in a place where I need to think a little differently, or we have to again evolve, using that word again, evolve our mindset, evolve our
Yes.
business. We have to be better positioned for the future. And these are all things that, we all hear about every day. So do you start with the bigger questions around, okay, so I've acknowledged I need to grow. I can no longer stay where I'm currently at. And then which one of these have you seen are the most difficult for someone to just
Yeah.
look at and go, "Yep, that's where I gotta go, but I don't wanna go there."
Yeah, it's a great question. In the early part A of the book, there is a chapter called Recognizing Your Gaps. And so it is all about helping people figure that out. Where are their pain points? Where did they struggle the most? Inviting them to reflect on that period of time,
Mm.
right, where they recognize I need to do more of or less of so they can get a focus and explore the rest of the book. Um, it's interesting because during the interviews, I interviewed like 28 leaders all over the world in different industries, different positions. And what became resoundingly clear by probably about a third of the way through were these 5 practices. They just kept showing up. It got to the point where it was almost predictable
Mm.
what people were going to tell me, which was a whole ton of fun. But two of them stand out that were tremendously difficult for people and how it was articulated to me. One was this empathy is your new superpower. So what happened during the pandemic is leaders ended up peering into people's living rooms and dining rooms, and I had one client who converted his garage to an
Mm.
office, right? But they got to see firsthand the challenges that employees were facing, and they were front and center and immersed in it in ways they never had been before. So, personal conversations that used to be taboo, you
Mm.
had no choice because you had an employee who was crying in front of you, in despair of isolation or too many conflicting priorities that they couldn't, get things going straight. So I think that was one of them that emerged as a difficult topic. And it's long been debated about whether empathy can be taught
Mm.
or not. And I think for that reason, it's challenging for some people to cross that border between personal and professional, and then figure out ways they can be more empathetic and still get the business result, not be the classic tree hugger, as one of my presidents used to say, right?
Yes.
Um, the
That right
other,
there, what you just said, is probably the trickiest part of all of that,
yeah,
is you still have a job to do. We still have things we need to execute on, but you are dealing with human beings through a wildly
that's right,
difficult experience. Not only that, but as leaders also suffered, also were having
right.
challenges.
Of their own. One leader described it to me as compassion fatigue,
Oh, wow.
because they have so many people on their team that were suffering in different ways that every time they got together on a one-on-one, it was all of that, and it's draining. So
Mm,
not only are they developing a new skill, but it's can be painful for some people to actually do that. Others leaned into it just naturally, and it went really well, but for many it was difficult. And the other big one was experimenting, right? That progress over perfection, letting go of those perfectionist tendencies that everything had to be just right.
mm,
Um, Trying new things when you weren't sure what was going to happen. So in some cases, knowing it was going to fail
yeah.
was really trepidatious for people to figure out.
One thing that you talk about too in this book that I'm fascinated by is the 1% better rule.
Hmm.
Say more about that.
So what I find in trying to bring positive change in all of my work is sometimes people will be dismissive of what's really happening around them. And the 1% better rule and 1% truth rule helps them reach for what is that one thing. So if there was one thing you could do just 1% better, what would that look like?
Mm,
If there was something that you think isn't real, what if there was 1% of truth to that? What would you do differently? And it's a way to challenge people in a constructive kind of way, to break old paradigms, to shift out of old models and old thinking that may be holding them back, and invite them to explore new perspectives and to figure out what's possible,
mm,
instead of getting stuck in, I can't do that anymore, that doesn't make sense, or that's not right. We hear a lot of that kind of deflection from people when it comes to making a positive change. And so that's really what that 1% rule is all about, is inviting them to think about it just a little bit differently. And even if you think it's complete crap, give it 1%. What would you
yeah.
do if even 1% of that was true?
Even just deciding that they're gonna read your book, even
Right,
just deciding that I'm gonna get into action on something.
right.
I'm gonna ask a different question. I'm gonna acknowledge even the state that I'm in. I'm
Yeah,
gonna pick my head up and say, "Is this the best we can do?
right.
Or
That's
what would
right.
it take to move us forward? Just even an inch."
Yeah, that's 1%. Just
That's
move forward in
1%.
one direction. It's interesting too, because now that I've been, talking about the book more openly, it's out there available. The digital promotion's been going on for about 30 days. Some people on my LinkedIn posts have questioned, is the office really dead?
Mm,
And those are the people. It's like, just 1%, take a look. The way the office was will never be again. Our expectations have shifted dramatically, very much like after 9/11,
mm,
right? In a very similar way. But now we've had 2 years to reconsider work and life. But those are the folks I invite in. I want to hear what you have to say. I want you to challenge others to say, what if it's never going to be the same?
mm.
What would we do differently if we had to reinvent, or as you said, continually evolve our workplace?
And who wants to work in the same old, same old?
Right. Some people
It
do.
it's just I mean, that's true. They're probably not people that you and I would hang out with.
Right.
But I do understand the psychological relationship to that. It's what I know. I don't like the
That's right.
change, but the change has already happened.
Correct.
So it's the now what part of your book title that I really appreciated is like,
Yeah.
even if you don't agree that the office is quote unquote dead,
Right.
you got to be thinking about the now what. Here we're
That's right.
2023. Everybody's already talking about where we're going to be third, fourth quarter of this year. Obviously, we're going through some economic troubling times, but
Yes.
everybody's already focused on July, August, September. What's it going to look like? How are we going to be prepared for 2024? And it's really fascinating conversations, the decisions people are making, the
Mhm.
talent that they're bringing into organizations. They're really mixing up the deck in terms of skill set, background,
Absolutely.
experience. And there's this really interesting tension generationally on how this is all going to go, which again, I love that you tackled that as well in
Well,
your
and
book.
right, and to that point, I interviewed a whole bunch of recent college grads to see what they think about it, and guess what? They spent their last 2 years of college virtual,
Mm,
and their first jobs were all virtual. So now these CEOs are saying everybody back in the office. I had one gal say to me, "I've never worked in an office. I don't know
mm.
what you're talking about. I don't know I wanna work in an office." They've never been there. It's a
Yeah.
totally different experience for them. The other thing that I think is really uncanny at the moment, I had people question the title of my book, right? Because I had to decide what that was going to be probably halfway through last year. And people said to me, "Oh, but we'll all be back in the office by then, won't we? Don't you think by the time your book comes out, we'll all be back in the office?" And I said, "You know what? I don't think it's going to happen that quick. And I don't think we're ever going to fully be back to what we were. And I hope we're not, right? I think we're so much better than that. There are so many good things to be learned from this remote working experience, right? And then here we are. So now my book hits and it's like the hottest topic out there. People trying to figure out, what do we do now?
Mm.
Where do we go from here? So it's just absolutely uncanny to me, the timing of my book release.
Yeah, divine.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
speaking of, let's get your crystal ball out
Ooh.
and let's look out 3 years from now.
Mm.
Describe what's going on in the workplace.
3 years from now, I would hope we see more of these blended hybrid workplaces where people want to go to get their work done for the right reasons. That we have found some happy medium of what a productive work environment looks like, feels like for people to thrive in, not just survive. And I really, really hope that these 5 leadership practices begin to take hold as the new way to lead in the future, that keeps people engaged in the work that they're doing, that helps people
Mm,
say, "I love what I do. I love the company I work for. I love working for this boss." Right? Remember those days?
yeah.
Some of us have had those great experiences, and giving people agency over how that manifests in their life would be the coup de grace, right? Getting to a
Mm.
place where leaders set up an environment that allows that to happen, and we let our employees bring their best selves to work and do their best work, and everybody wins.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I love the fact that these 5 principles are out there. And the one that I'm really connected to is very much around the signals.
Yeah.
Thinking ahead, picking like, what reading the tea leaves, reading the
Yeah.
writing on the wall, just being much more
Peeking
attuned.
around the corner.
And as somebody who's been doing this, as I shared with you, just shared, had my 18th year anniversary.
Yeah.
And in the last 2 years or 3 years, really, I have had to really pay attention to the signals.
Hmm.
What's going to work? What's relevant? What's different? What questions do I need to be asking myself? What questions do I need to be asking my clients, the companies that I serve? And I love this world that you've just described. And
Yeah.
I know that your book is going to be a bestseller.
Oh,
I could see you on the national stage talking about it to large audiences, getting people to shift and move and be at peace with
yeah.
whatever the flow is.
Yeah. That's right.
And so, Maryanne, keep doing this amazing work in the world. You are
Thank you
such
so
a
much.
gift. I'm so grateful to be in your circle, and I wish you so much goodness with this
Thank
new
you.
book.
And let's hope that we can get this book out there and moving for people to grab onto and start thinking about how are we going to lead differently in the future. That would be great.
Amen.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Warriors at Work show. If you are interested in learning more about what we do at the Warriors at Work show and platform, be sure to go over to my website, Jeannie Coomber, and subscribe to my monthly Warrior Playbook newsletter. I share everything that I'm up to month by month, as well as some lessons and insights that I've learned. I'm also interested in hearing any feedback you have about this conversation or future topics. So reach out to me directly on jc@jeanniecoomber.com or on LinkedIn. Be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this Warriors at Work conversation. Subscribe, review, and rate us. It's the best way to get this message out into the world. Be well.